I'd always thought of Brook Lane as the kind of place where real trouble didn't exist, or at least didn't belong. It wasn't a gated community or anything polished like that, but it carried the same quiet, tucked-away feeling. The street bent off the county road like a crooked finger, lined with modest ranch houses that had been standing since the late 70s or early 80s. Every yard seemed to have its own personality. Wide patches of grass, a few stubborn vegetable gardens, a couple of swing sets that had seen better days. Even the mailboxes leaned in slightly different directions, like tired old men who couldn't quite stand up straight anymore. 5 years ago, after the wreckage of my marriage, I found myself here. I hadn't wanted noise or the constant press of city life where it felt like I was inhaling other people's arguments, their stress, their exhaust fumes. I wanted quiet. The house I picked wasn't much. Faded blue siding, a driveway cracked like an old plate. But it was mine. Slowly, it grew into something that felt safe. Safe enough that I could tell who was pulling in by the sound of their engine. Safe enough that the mailman wasn't just the mailman, but Carl, who asked about my day when he handed me bills. Safe enough that in the summer I could sit on the porch with a sweating bottle of beer and listen to crickets sing against the backdrop of an occasional barking dog. People here weren't nosy. We didn't live in each other's pockets, but we weren't strangers either. To my right was Marlene, a retired school librarian who seemed physically incapable of letting a pie go uneaten. She'd knock gently on my door if I didn't find the dessert she left on my porch within the hour. To my left were the Hayes family, 2 parents trying to survive their 40s and twin boys who swung daily between sweet politeness and the kind of mischief that made you double-check your garden hose for kinks. So when the house across the street went up for sale last fall, I barely noticed. It had belonged to the Bakers, a kindly older couple who'd decided Florida and their daughter were better suited for their retirement years. The place sat empty through the winter, blinds closed, yard looking forgotten. I only realized it had sold when a new silver SUV appeared one afternoon. No moving truck, no stacks of boxes on the curb, just that one car parked neatly in the cracked driveway. The first time I actually saw him was on a Wednesday in March. I'd just hauled myself out of the grocery store parking lot, refusing, as always, to make 2 trips. My arms were stretched and aching with 3 overstuffed bags when I heard a voice call out, "Hey there." I glanced up, shifting the bags against my hip. A man leaned casually against the SUV across the street, hands tucked into the front pocket of his hoodie. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Short brown hair, clean-shaven. His jeans looked new, like they hadn't yet lost their stiffness. He gave me a smile, tight, hesitant as though he wasn't sure whether I was worth the trouble of smiling at. Hi, I managed, adjusting my grip before a loaf of bread slipped out. "You live right there?" he asked, pointing toward my house. "Yeah," I said with a quick nod. "Been here a few years, just across from you, I guess." He pushed off from the SUV, taking a few measured steps closer to the edge of his driveway. "Name's Dean. Just moved in last week. Figured I should at least say hi to the neighbors." "That's nice of you," I said, balancing a bag against my knee long enough to offer a half wave. "I'm Claire." Dean's smile flickered again, closed-lipped, controlled, before his gaze drifted down the street like he was cataloging each house, each person behind the curtains. "Quiet little spot, huh?" he asked. "Most of the time," I answered, trying to sound friendly without sounding too open. "It's pretty peaceful." "Peaceful's good," he murmured, his eyes still roaming. "I like quiet, but you know." He let the words trail off, unfinished, like there was more he could say but wasn't sure if he should. "Anyway, guess I'll see you around." That was all he said. No handshake, no offer to help with the groceries I was obviously struggling with. Just a curt nod before he turned and disappeared into his garage. Over the next couple of weeks, I noticed Dean more and more, though not in the way you normally notice a new neighbor. It wasn't bumping into him at the mailbox or passing him while taking out the trash. No, it was stranger than that. He spent a lot of time outside, but never really doing anything. Some evenings I'd catch him standing in his driveway, hands buried in the front pocket of his hoodie, just scanning the street. Not looking at the sunset, not glued to a phone, just watching, like he was memorizing the layout of the neighborhood, the rhythms of our lives. One Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning out my car, emptying the floor mats of crumbs and shoving old receipts into a trash bag, when I saw him again. This time he was crouched down at the very edge of his yard where it met the line of woods. He wasn't pulling weeds or picking up trash. He wasn't moving at all, just crouched low, facing the trees, completely still. I froze with an empty coffee cup in my hand, trying to decide whether to say something. Before I could, he turned his head sharply and looked over his shoulder. Our eyes locked. My chest jolted like I'd been startled awake. His face was blank, expressionless, but there was a weight in the way he looked at me, something I couldn't place. I lifted my hand in a small, awkward wave. He didn't wave back. About a month after he moved in, we had our first real conversation, though calling it that feels generous. It was close to 8 p.m. The sky had slipped into that deep, moody blue right before it surrendered to night. I'd stepped out onto my porch to pull in a potted plant before the temperature dipped. That's when his voice came from across the street. "You walk a lot, don't you?" I startled, my hand tightening on the ceramic pot. He was standing at the edge of his yard, barely visible in the dim light. I hadn't even seen him step outside. Yeah, I said, suddenly hyper-aware of myself, of how often I was out there alone. It's a nice area for it. "Where do you usually go?" His tone was calm, almost casual, but something about it made me hesitate. It was the kind of question that should have been harmless, yet the way he asked it carried a certain weight, like he wasn't just curious, like he was charting my movements. "Oh, just around," I answered vaguely, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "Different streets, sometimes the park." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. "Yeah, I've noticed." And just like that, he turned and walked back up his driveway, disappearing into the dark. The first night it happened, I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. I'd taken my usual route toward the park around 6:30, just after dinner. The air was soft and warm, spring finally taking root. After looping the park's path, I headed home, relaxed, until I caught movement in the corner of my eye. Across the street, half hidden behind a maple tree, stood Dean. No dog, no phone, no reason. Just standing there, watching the street, watching me. I forced myself to keep walking, each step heavy, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't look back until I was halfway home. By then, he was gone. The second night, it wasn't coincidence. I'd switched up my route, curving past a row of older houses before looping back. About 10 minutes in, I saw a figure ahead near the corner. As I drew closer, dread sank into my stomach. It was Dean. He didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't move toward me. He just turned his head as I passed, his gaze following me in silence. By the time I made it back to Brook Lane, it felt like I'd swallowed a block of ice. The third night, it escalated. This time he was at the park itself, waiting near the tree line. The second I spotted him, I pivoted, forcing my legs to carry me back the way I came. Less than a minute later, I heard them, footsteps, steady, deliberate, not hurrying, but syncing with mine. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was there, maybe 50 feet back, not close enough to claim he was with me, but close enough that there was no mistaking the intent. I walked faster. So did he. By the time I reached my driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my keys. My driveway is long and the sound of his footsteps carried behind me. Closer now, heavy on the pavement. I jammed the key into the lock, shoved the door open, and slammed it shut behind me, twisting the deadbolt with a ragged breath. 5 seconds later, the doorknob rattled. He had tried it. He tried to open my door. I didn't go on another evening walk for a month. He never showed up on my porch again, but that didn't mean he stopped. Some nights, Long after midnight, I'd peek through my curtains and see him, just standing in his yard, still as stone, staring across the street at my house. One night, I looked at 1:14 a.m., nothing. The next night, I checked at 1:12, and there he was, waiting. That's when I understood. He wasn't just watching, he was keeping time. I never imagined I'd end up owning a mobile home on the outskirts of Chicago, but that's how life works. It corners you, forces you to make choices you never thought you'd make. The city had worn me down to the bone. The traffic that never let up, the endless honking, the constant blur of people brushing past you like you didn't even exist. It all started to feel like a slow suffocation. And as much as I loved certain parts of Chicago, the food, the energy, the sense that something was always happening, I needed space. Quiet. A place where I could breathe without feeling like the walls were inching closer. When I saw the listing online, I honestly thought it was a scam. A mobile home on 2 acres of land, priced far lower than anything I'd been looking at. The photos weren't flattering, grainy, dull, clearly taken in bad lighting. But the place looked solid. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room. Nothing extravagant but functional. The ad even mentioned it was about 15 minutes from a small ski hill, which caught me immediately. I'd been snowboarding since high school, and the thought of having a retreat where I could grab my gear, drive a short stretch, and be on the slopes within minutes, that was a dream I didn't know I'd been waiting for. The seller didn't say much over the phone, just that she was relocating. Her tone was clipped, efficient, almost impatient. I figured maybe she hated the long winters and wanted out before the first snow. Still, the price was suspiciously low. Part of me expected to arrive and find the place gutted, mold creeping up the walls, maybe even condemned. But when I finally saw it, it wasn't bad at all. Worn, yes, but lived in. The kind of space that just needed elbow grease. A deep scrub, some paint, new furniture. It felt like a project I could make my own. I closed on it at the tail end of October. By the first weekend of November, I had my parents and my younger sister riding up with me, the back of my dad's pickup stuffed with hand-me-down furniture. A couch, 2 recliners, a small dining set, and a queen bed. We were halfway through wrestling the couch down from the truck when I first met him. A man appeared at the far end of the gravel road, walking toward us with a steady, unhurried gait. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded green flannel that looked older than me. His baseball cap was sweat-stained, the logo on it too faded to make out. His face was all angles and weather, his stubble thick with streaks of gray. His eyes, dark, steady, never left us. "Afternoon," he called, his voice cutting clean across the open air. "You the new owner?" I set my end of the couch down and wiped my palms against my jeans before nodding. "Yeah, just moved in today." He stepped up, extending a hand. The grip was rough, like shaking a block of sandpaper. "Name's Ray. Been out here going on 20 years. Guess that makes me your closest neighbor." His accent was thick, the kind that rounded words flat. Neighbor sounded like neighbor. His gaze flicked past me, taking in my parents and sister with a quick sweep before coming back to rest on me. I introduced myself, told him I'd been living in the city. "Chicago," I said, almost defensively. Ray smirked at that, like the word itself was funny. "City kid, huh? Well, welcome to the sticks." We made the usual small talk, where I worked, how I found the place, while my dad hovered near the truck, clearly itching to get the unloading finished. After about 10 minutes, he clapped his hands together and said, "All right, we better keep at it," in that polite but firm dad tone. Ray didn't leave right away. He stood off to the side of the driveway, hands in his flannel pockets, watching us carry box after box inside. His stare wasn't openly hostile, but it wasn't casual either. It was too fixed, too present. Finally, with a lazy 2-finger wave, he turned and started back down the road. At the time, I shrugged it off. Rural neighborliness, maybe. Just someone curious about the newcomer. 2 weeks later, I went back alone. My plan was to bring up my snowboarding gear, set up the Wi-Fi, and try living in the place without my family's chatter filling it up, to see how it felt when it was just me in the silence. It was mid-afternoon when I pulled into the gravel driveway, the November air already sharp with that early winter bite. I hauled 2 duffel bags out of the trunk, balancing them awkwardly against my hip as I made for the deck. I was halfway through when I heard it. "Thought that was your car I saw." The voice came from behind. I turned. Ray was walking up the road again, same slow, deliberate pace. Only this time he didn't stop at the edge of the driveway. He climbed the deck steps and planted himself beside the open doorway, close enough that I could smell the faint musk of cigarettes on his jacket. "Place is shaping up nice," he said, peering past me into the living room. His eyes moved like they were cataloging everything inside. I forced a polite smile. "Thanks. Still a work in progress." His gaze lingered longer than felt normal. "Thanks. Got a minute for a beer?" Ray asked, his voice casual but edged with something I couldn't quite place. It felt awkward to turn him down, especially when I was still trying to make a good impression as the newcomer. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "Let me lock up first." I slid the door shut, twisted the lock, and followed him up the gravel road. His place sat about 200 yards from mine, slightly larger but rough around the edges, siding peeling in long strips, gutters sagging, and a deck that groaned with every step as we climbed onto it. "Have a seat," he said, pulling open the fridge and grabbing 2 green bottles. He twisted one open and slid it across the table to me before sinking into a chair opposite. The patio table was weathered, paint chipped, one leg wobbling slightly whenever he leaned on it. We started off easy. He asked how I liked the area, how I thought I'd manage the winters. I asked how long he'd been there. His answers were short, sometimes laced with a dry chuckle, as if he knew more than he was saying. But his tone shifted when he circled back to the same question he'd asked before. "Where'd you say you're from again?" "Chicago," I replied. That smirk returned, tugging at one corner of his mouth. Only this time, it wasn't the friendly kind. "Lot of you city folks moving out here lately," he muttered. "Driving prices up, leaving your trash around, hunting without permits, acting like you own the place." I let out a small, nervous laugh, trying to soften the tension. "Well, I'm not here to cause problems. Just wanted a quiet place to get away. Do some snowboarding." "Snowboarding?" He repeated the word like it was sour on his tongue. "Don't know why y'all can't just stay where the hell you belong." The bottle tilted in his hand as he leaned forward, voice rougher now, carrying an edge. His eyes sharpened, jaw flexing. The air between us grew heavy. I kept my tone even. "Not everyone's like that. I'm just here to enjoy the place, that's all." His face reddened. He wasn't shouting yet, but the tightness in his expression made it feel close. My pulse quickened, the back of my neck hot. I pushed my chair back, standing carefully. "Okay, I think I'm gonna head back. Thanks for the beer." He didn't answer. Just stared down into the neck of his bottle like I'd ceased to exist. I made my way off the deck, my footsteps quick but not hurried. About 100 feet down the road, his voice carried after me. "I'm sorry." I didn't turn, just lifted a hand with a quick thumbs up and kept walking. That night, lying on the bare mattress in my new bedroom, a movie playing dimly on my laptop, I heard it. A voice. Low, muffled at first, like someone muttering curses outside. My stomach knotted instantly. I paused the movie and sat up, straining to hear. I crept to the window, pressed my face to the cold glass. Nothing. Just the black cutout of trees swaying in the night. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The next day around noon, a knock rattled the front door. I froze, every muscle tightening. Then came his voice, deep and deliberate. "I know you're in there, your car's here." I stayed silent, motionless in the bedroom, heart hammering. The knocking kept on, slow and steady, then harder. Minutes dragged like hours. At least 5 passed before it finally stopped. The rest of the day was unbearable. Every creak of the mobile home felt amplified. Every sound from outside made me flinch. I didn't even want to open the door, didn't want to breathe too loud in case he was out there listening. That night, halfway through another movie, I heard it again. Louder this time. A voice cutting through the quiet. I snapped the laptop shut and crept toward the sliding glass door. With a shaky hand, I flicked on the deck light. Ray stood 5 feet into the tree line, arms stiff at his sides, his face locked on me. The second the light hit him, he bolted crashing into the woods. I fumbled for my phone and called my dad, my words tumbling out, my voice trembling. He told me not to involve the police yet, that if I did, I'd never be able to come back without trouble. But less than an hour later, any hesitation vanished. From outside, his voice erupted in a drunken roar, tearing through the night. "Stupid piece of shit! I know you're in there. Leave! Nobody wants you here." I sat frozen on the living room floor, phone in hand, back pressed against the couch. Every instinct screamed at me to hide, to stay small, invisible. His shouts went on, slurred and vicious, before finally stomping away into the dark. By morning, my decision was made. I packed every valuable I had, locked every door, and drove back to Chicago without looking back once. The property is still mine, and sooner or later, I'll have to return. But when I do, I won't be going alone. I've always thought the quietest neighborhoods could cradle the darkest truths, tucked away behind white picket fences and freshly cut lawns. When we moved into that little cul-de-sac on the east side of Pinewood, I honestly believed we'd finally found what we'd been chasing for years. A place that felt permanent, safe. The kind of street where children's laughter rang out until the glow of the streetlights sent them home, where neighbors waved from their porches while sipping coffee, and where the loudest sound at night was the constant soothing hum of crickets. It was March of 2001. Adam and I had been married 11 years by then. Our oldest, Lucas, had just turned 8 and was in 2nd grade, old enough to argue about bedtime but still young enough to believe me when I said monsters weren't real. Emily was 4, bright-eyed and endlessly curious, and our youngest, Noah, was only 2. He clung to me so much that some days I joked about needing a second hip to carry him properly. For years, we'd been crammed inside a rented townhouse in the city, the kind where you could hear your neighbors through the walls and the kids had to play on a patch of asphalt instead of grass. Then Adam's uncle passed, leaving us a modest inheritance. We both knew instantly what to do: find space, safety, and a slower rhythm for our family. Pinewood was exactly that. Not bustling, not too rural. Just a mid-sized town surrounded by farmland and long stretches of wooded back roads. A 20-minute drive to the nearest real downtown, yet quiet enough to feel like another world. When we found the little single-story house at the far end of a dead-end street, we didn't care that it wasn't flashy. Beige siding, a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs, a yard that needed some love. It was ours. The kind of home I pictured my kids remembering with nostalgia when they were grown. Those first 6 months felt like a dream. Lucas caught the bus 2 blocks away each morning. Emily went to preschool 3 times a week, coming home with finger paint masterpieces. Noah stayed with me, toddling after me while I cooked or cleaned. We met a few neighbors too, Mrs. Carter across the street, who baked pies for every possible occasion, and the Johnsons next door, a polite, quiet couple in their 50s who always smiled and waved. Life felt steady, predictable. Then one Friday morning in early October, I noticed the moving truck. It was parked in front of the long, vacant house at the very end of our street. That place had sat empty for nearly a year, its hedges overgrown, paint curling from the siding like paper. It was an eyesore, honestly, and I felt a flicker of excitement at the thought of someone finally breathing life back into it. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes when I first saw them. 2 men unloading furniture. One was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn jeans and a black hoodie, moving with slow, deliberate strength. The other, slimmer, busied himself with boxes more than furniture. Behind them sat a beat-up green sedan, its driver's side door hanging open. A woman sat inside, her long dark hair falling forward like a curtain, her face half hidden. She never stepped out of the car. Not once. "New neighbors?" Adam asked that night, loosening his tie as he sat down to dinner. "Looks like it," I said, sliding a plate in front of him. "Didn't see any kids, though." I hesitated, chewing the inside of my cheek. "I don't know. Something about them felt off." Adam chuckled, spearing a bite of chicken. "Off how? You barely saw them." I frowned, staring at my glass of water. "They didn't talk to anyone, didn't wave when I went for the mail, and the woman, she just sat there in the car staring at the house, like she didn't want to be there at all." Over the next week, I gathered scraps of information the way neighbors do. The tall man was Dale. I caught his name when Mr. Johnson exchanged a quick, polite hello. The slimmer one was his younger brother Shane. The woman remained a mystery. I hadn't managed to catch even a proper glimpse of her. Despite moving in, they kept themselves walled off. Their blinds stayed tightly closed, day and night, no exceptions. And in a neighborhood as small and watchful as ours, that kind of thing doesn't go unnoticed. Everyone else's homes on our street felt warm, open, and alive. You could see the glow of lamps through parted curtains, hear the clatter of dishes at dinner time, smell the faint drift of someone grilling on their back deck. But theirs, it was different. Closed off, shuttered. A house that seemed to be holding its breath. At first, it was little things. Lucas came home from school one afternoon, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders, and mentioned casually, "Mom, that guy, Dale, he was at the corner by the bus stop." "Maybe he was just waiting for a ride," I said, trying to sound breezy as I rinsed out his lunchbox. Lucas frowned, his eyebrows knitting together. He didn't say hi, he just looked at me. I felt something shift inside me at that, but I didn't say anything. 2 days later, Emily came barreling into the house, cheeks flushed, tricycle abandoned in the driveway. "Mommy," she panted, "the man with the dark hoodie. He was standing by the mailbox, watching me." That was when my unease hardened into a cold knot in my stomach. I started paying closer attention. When I'd take Noah into the yard to play, I'd sometimes spot Dale leaning against his beat-up car, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. But his eyes weren't wandering idly like a bored smoker. They were fixed. On us. On my children. On our house. The second I locked eyes with him, though, he'd flick the cigarette, turn abruptly, and vanish inside, or pull out his phone and pretend to scroll. One Saturday morning, I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe they were just private, maybe shy. Maybe I was letting gossip and imagination get the better of me. So, I decided to introduce myself properly. Emily skipped beside me, her little hand warm in mine while I carried a plate of banana bread still warm from the oven. When I knocked, Shane opened the door. His movements were quick, almost twitchy, and he glanced over his shoulder before widening the door a crack. "Hey," I said, smiling. "I'm Rachel, from up the street. Just wanted to welcome you guys to the neighborhood." I held out the plate. He took it without smiling. "Thanks." "Is Dale around?" I asked, forcing a bright, neighborly tone. His eyes flickered toward the staircase behind him. "Nah, he's, busy." Then, without another word, he shut the door in my face. Walking back up the street with Emily chattering beside me, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe they'd had bad experiences before. Maybe they just wanted to be left alone. But deep down, I knew the feeling gnawing at my gut wasn't imagination. The turning point came on a bitterly cold Thursday afternoon in November. The air carried the sharp smell of wood smoke, and the low sun painted everything in gray light. Lucas was due home any minute. I was folding laundry in the living room when a knock rattled the door. Not a polite tap, rapid, frantic, almost panicked. I opened it to find Mrs. Carter, her face pale, her eyes wide. "Rachel, you need to come. Now." "What's wrong?" My pulse spiked. "It's Lucas, down the street. There's a man." She broke off, shaking her head. "I think he was trying to get him into a car. I didn't think." I dropped the laundry, bolted barefoot into the street, Mrs. Carter racing beside me. Halfway down the block, I saw it. Lucas, pressed against the fence, his backpack hanging loose off one shoulder, and Dale, standing beside that dented green sedan. The passenger door stood open. His hand was wrapped around my son's arm. "Lucas!" I screamed. My voice cracked. Dale's head snapped toward me. Adam, who had just pulled into the driveway minutes earlier, saw me running and charged after me, shouting, "Get away from him!" For a moment, Dale didn't move. His eyes, dark, cold, utterly empty, locked with mine. I'd seen anger before, indifference too, but this was something worse. Eyes that didn't see my child as a boy, but as a thing, a possession. Then, with sudden violence, he shoved Lucas against the fence, ducked into the car, and slammed the door. Before he could peel away, Mr. Johnson and his brother burst from their backyard, blocking the street. "You're not going anywhere," Mr. Johnson barked. Dale's face twisted. He revved the engine, tires squealing, then swerved hard, narrowly missing them, and tore off down the street. I reached Lucas, scooping him up in shaking arms, clutching him so tightly I thought I might crush him. His voice was small, muffled against my shoulder. He said he needed help finding his dog, but he didn't have a leash. No picture. He kept saying I had to get in the car to see. We called the police immediately. The officer who arrived, barely older than a college kid, listened, scribbling in his notepad, his tone maddeningly flat. "Sounds like maybe he was just trying to talk to your kid," he said. I stared at him, stunned. He had the car door open. His hand was on my son. "We'll make a report," he muttered without looking up. But they never found Dale. By the next morning, the house at the end of the street was empty. No truck, no sedan, no trace anyone had ever lived there. Even the banana bread plate I'd given Shane was gone. For months afterward, I refused to let Lucas walk to the bus stop alone. I bought locks, motion lights, even a fence. But what haunted me wasn't just how close I'd come to losing him. It was the memory of Dale's eyes. Eyes that stripped away humanity, that looked at my child as something to take. Lucas is 32 now with kids of his own, but I can still recall every detail of that afternoon. The wood smoke curling in the air, the pale November sky, the pounding of my heart in my ears. And every time I see a moving truck pull into a quiet street, I wonder, what kind of neighbors are moving in? And are they the kind who ever plan to stay? I was 14 the summer everything changed. We lived in a tucked-away corner of Queens, the kind of neighborhood where the loudest drama was usually Mr. Romano yelling from his porch because his fat orange cat had gotten itself stranded on a roof again. Our house was one of many lined up in a neat but slightly tired row. 2-story brick homes, postage stamp lawns with cracked concrete paths, and maple trees that spread their branches wide enough to cast long, dappled shadows over the sidewalks. My mom worked endless shifts at the bakery down the street, her clothes always smelling faintly of yeast and sugar. My dad drove city buses for the MTA, his hours unpredictable, his patience worn thin from long routes. I was the middle kid, the invisible one, wedged between my older brother, who treated me like background noise, and my little sister, who followed me everywhere like I was some kind of hero. I never really understood why she looked at me that way. That summer, my life revolved around my bike. A beat-up red Schwinn with chipped paint and one handle grip missing. My uncle had handed it down, and though it wasn't pretty, it was mine. It meant escape. With it, I had the freedom to vanish for hours, pedaling through unfamiliar back streets, racing through the small park a few blocks away, sometimes daring myself to cross into neighborhoods I barely knew. It felt safe back then, familiar. Everyone waved, Everyone recognized each other. At least that's what I told myself. The first time I saw him, it was one of those sticky late June afternoons where the air pressed down like a blanket. I was riding slow, enjoying the breeze on my face when I noticed him across the street. An older man, late 50s maybe, thinning gray hair, round glasses, the kind of gentle, forgettable look that made me think of grandfathers feeding pigeons in parks. He had a golden retriever with him, big, beautiful, the kind of dog that glowed in sunlight. I barely glanced at him until the dog lifted its head, ears perked, tail wagging. I smiled without thinking. "Beautiful dog," I called, still coasting on my bike. The man gave me a polite smile, a small wave, nothing more. I pedaled past and didn't think twice. Harmless, completely harmless, or so I thought, but it kept happening. Every few days I'd spot him, same street, same time, always with the dog. Sometimes we passed in silence, sometimes I nodded or muttered hello. He never gave off anything odd, just another stranger who belonged to the background of summer. Then came early July. I'd spent the morning sweating in the bakery with Mom, hauling trays, wiping counters. By the time I escaped, my legs were already rubber. I was riding slow, almost dragging my feet on the pedals when I saw him again. "She's gorgeous," I said, letting the bike roll nearly to a stop. My eyes were on the dog. His whole face lit up. Too much, like a light switched on inside him. "Thank you," he said, pulling gently on the leash. The dog sat obediently, tongue lolling. "Her name's Daisy. Want to pet her?" I hesitated, toes balancing me on the asphalt. My hands stayed glued to the handlebars. "I'm okay," I said quickly. "She's really pretty, though." We traded a few harmless words after that. He seemed perfectly normal. I pushed off again, coasting away, already letting the exchange slip from my mind. But when I looped back toward home half an hour later, taking the same street, I spotted him again. Not walking, not moving. He was standing near the curb, right in the middle of the block. Waiting. I slowed down without meaning to. He lifted a hand, smiled warmly, stepping closer. "Hey there," he said like we were already friends. "How's your ride?" "Good," I muttered, one hand tightening on the handlebar. "Just heading home." "Where's home?" he asked, casual, like it was nothing. I didn't think twice. I thought it was just conversation, the kind of neighborly small talk grown-ups always made. "Just over on 89th Street, I said. It felt harmless at the time. It didn't. I was 14, and back then I didn't think about boundaries the way I do now. At that age, adults asking questions just felt normal. Harmless curiosity. "You go to school around here?" he asked, leaning slightly on the dog's leash, his voice casual. "Yeah," I said, shrugging. "Roosevelt Middle, going into 9th this fall." His smile deepened. Something about it made my stomach tighten, though I didn't understand why yet. It wasn't obvious, nothing you could point to, just an edge hiding behind the friendliness. "You know," he said, gesturing past his yard toward the dark line of trees behind his house. "There's a path back there. Leads straight to the Queen Center Mall, lot shorter than biking the main road." I frowned immediately. I knew this neighborhood. Behind his house wasn't a path. It was nothing but a stretch of tangled woods, then the high fences of another block of houses. Dead ends, no mall, no shortcut. I gave a nervous laugh. "I don't think so. The mall's the other way." He tilted his head, still smiling, but the expression didn't look right anymore. "You sure? I've been here a long time. I can show you." Something in my gut iced over then. Maybe it was the way his tone dipped lower, or the way he took a half step closer. My palms were slick against the grips of my handlebars. "My mom wants me home," I blurted, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "She's waiting for me." For a moment, he studied me, eyes flat behind those round glasses. Daisy, the retriever, stood silently at his side, tail twitching once like she sensed the shift. Finally, he stepped back, loosening the leash. "All right," he said. "Be safe, kid." I didn't answer. I pushed hard on the pedals, wheels clattering against the cracked pavement. By the time I reached our street, my chest was tight, my heart racing way too fast for such a short ride. When Mom got home later, I told her everything, every detail. The way he'd asked where I went to school, the lie about the path, the way his smile had changed. She didn't say much at first, just listened with her lips pressed tight, her eyes scanning my face. Then she nodded, her expression hard in a way that unsettled me more than her silence. That night, I lay awake in my room, and through the thin walls I heard her talking low to Dad in the kitchen. Her voice was sharp, urgent, while his was lower, steady but tense. I couldn't make out every word, but the way she said, "I mean it," seriously, sent a chill into my chest. Weeks passed. I avoided that block entirely, sticking to my old route through the park. I thought maybe it was over, that nothing would come of it. Then one evening, Mom's friend Angela came by for coffee. I sat in the living room pretending to read, but their voices drifted from the kitchen. "Wait, what's his name?" Angela asked suddenly. Mom said it. Silence followed. Then Angela's voice dropped. "He's on the registry." I froze. Even at 14, I knew what that meant. My throat went dry. I didn't move, barely breathed as their hushed conversation went on, my mom's voice rising once. "No, I'm serious," he spoke to her. After that came a long silence that stretched tight like wire. A few days later, Mom went for her usual evening walk. When she came back, she set her keys down with a hard clatter. Her face was pale, lips pressed together. "I saw him," she said. My stomach flipped. "What happened?" "I told him if he ever talked to you again, we'd go to the police." "What did he say?" "Nothing," she replied flatly. "He just stared at me, didn't even deny it. After that, I never saw him on the sidewalks again. No more Daisy, no more casual waves. Sometimes, though, I'd catch sight of him on his porch, sitting silent, his gaze somewhere far off, or maybe not far off at all. He never looked at me again, but that didn't erase the weight of it. And even years later, whenever I found myself near that block, I couldn't stop my eyes from drifting to the trees behind his house, that useless stretch of woods that he'd tried to make sound like a shortcut. Every time, my stomach nodded the same way it had that day, because now I knew what I hadn't then. Whatever he had planned, it wasn't just a friendly conversation. I'd been in Los Angeles for just over 6 months when I finally started to feel like I had a grip on this new chapter of my life. Getting there hadn't been easy. I'd walked away from my job, from friends who knew me inside and out, from a neighborhood where people actually greeted each other in the mornings. But after the divorce, I needed distance, physical and emotional. I told myself moving to LA would be a clean slate. No shared bank account bleeding into arguments, no memories of slammed doors in the kitchen. Just me, a modest 2-bedroom rental, and the hope of a reset. The street I ended up on sat tucked away in one of the quieter stretches of the city. It wasn't quite suburban, but it was far enough from the nonstop hum of traffic to grant the occasional moment of peace. The houses were older, stucco walls faded by sun and time, palm trees leaning at uneasy angles as if weary from decades of weather. My little rental fit snugly between 2 larger homes. On my right lived a retired nurse who kept mostly to herself. On my left, that's where Daniel Reed lived. I met Daniel 3 days after moving in. It was late afternoon and I was wrestling with a box that refused to budge from the back of my car. My shirt stuck to me with sweat, and I muttered a curse under my breath. Then I heard a voice float over the hedge. "Need a hand there, neighbor?" I turned and saw a man in his late 40s, tall, salt and pepper hair, a faded Dodgers t-shirt and worn jeans. He wore one of those easy smiles you only see in commercials, the kind that makes you trust someone before you realize you're doing it. Yeah, actually," I said, exhaling in relief. Thanks. These boxes are heavier than they look. He came around and gripped one effortlessly. You just move in? Yeah. From up north. Still trying to get things sorted. Well, welcome to the block. He tilted his head toward the pale yellow house next door, its white trim catching the sunlight. I'm Daniel. I live right there. Chris, I said, shaking his hand. Chris, got it. If you ever need anything, tools, an extra pair of hands, whatever, just knock. Always happy to help a neighbor. It was the kind of introduction I hadn't expected in Los Angeles, where people usually keep their eyes on the ground or the phone in their hand. I remember thinking, maybe I got lucky. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I crossed paths often. He'd wave when I pulled into my driveway. Sometimes he'd wander over, leaning against the hedge, chatting about the weather or asking how the unpacking was coming along. He was funny too, quick with dry, sarcastic comments that caught me off guard and made me laugh. The kind of guy you could imagine having a beer with on a Saturday evening. It wasn't until I met his son that something felt off. One Saturday morning, I was outside watering the plants when a boy, 12, maybe 13, came out of Daniel's front door. He had the same dark hair as his father, but his eyes stopped me. They weren't curious the way kids' eyes usually are. They were cautious, wary, as though he'd learned to measure every move before making it. Hey there, I called, giving him a small wave. He hesitated, then said quietly, Hi. You Daniel's son? He gave a quick nod. I'm Evan. Nice to meet you, Evan. You heading out to play? His pause stretched longer than it should have. No, Dad doesn't like me going far. I'm just going to the backyard. It struck me as odd. When I was his age, I roamed blocks away until dinner, biking past places my parents didn't even know about. Before I could respond, the front door creaked again and Daniel stepped out onto the porch. Evan, he said sharply, though he still wore that smile. Back inside now. Evan's head lowered immediately. Okay, he murmured, slipping past me toward the house. His shoulders sagged in a way I'd never seen in a kid before. Defeat without resistance. Daniel looked at me, grin still in place but with something firmer behind it. He's got chores. You know how kids are. I smiled back, but inside I couldn't shake the heaviness in the boy's movements, the speed with which he obeyed. It didn't feel like the harmless reluctance of a kid with chores. It felt like something else, something heavier. It did feel heavier, like a weight settling into the neighborhood that I couldn't quite put words to. Over the next couple of months, Daniel began to change. The cheerful, quick-witted guy who had welcomed me so warmly seemed to fade into someone else. Our casual chats turned into curt nods. Sometimes I'd wave, and he wouldn't even acknowledge me, his gaze fixed straight ahead, as though I weren't there at all. Other neighbors started sharing stories too, small, unsettling anecdotes. Daniel had yelled at one for parking too close to his driveway. Another said he'd cursed at their kids for playing ball in the street. Even a woman walking her dog at night told me he came out on his porch and screamed because the barking kept him awake. Then came the night I can't forget, no matter how hard I try. It was a Thursday. I'd stayed up late watching TV, letting reruns fill the silence of the house. Sometime after 2 a.m., I stirred awake to shouting. At first, I thought it was just one of those drunken street arguments you sometimes hear in the city. But it didn't fade, and the voices weren't out on the road. They were coming from Daniel's house. The shouting escalated quickly. Daniel's voice thundered, full of fury. Another man's voice tried to push back, words tumbling but constantly cut off. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, unable to make out the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. Rage. Then suddenly, a sharp, violent bang. Silence. I held my breath. Then came a sound that made my stomach clench. A low guttural grunt, followed by the scrape of something heavy dragging across a floor. Every instinct screamed at me not to look, to close my window, bury my head under the blanket, and wait for it to pass. But curiosity is cruel, and fear has its own gravity. My bedroom window faced the side of Daniel's house. The blinds were half open. Slowly, hesitantly, I got up and peered out. Through an upstairs window at Daniel's, I saw something. At first, my mind scrambled to make it ordinary. A punching bag? A curtain bunched at a strange angle? But then the shape resolved. Arms hanging limp at the sides, a head drooping at a grotesque tilt. My stomach turned. Cold sweat slicked my skin. I slid the window shut as quietly as possible. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped my phone as I dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" the operator asked. I found myself whispering, though I couldn't explain why. I think my neighbor just killed someone. I can see something hanging in his window. Please send someone. "Sir, I need you to speak clearly," she said, her voice firm but calm. "Is the person in immediate danger?" "No," I stammered. I think it's too late." The whispering wasn't a choice. It was instinct, as if my brain knew that any sound might draw his attention to me. The police arrived within minutes. No sirens, just the low rumble of their engines rolling in like shadows. I stayed by my window, heart hammering as they approached Daniel's door. He answered, casual at first, but I watched the tension creep into his body language as they spoke. Moments later, they pushed inside. More officers arrived. A stretcher came out, draped in a sheet. Later, I learned the truth, or at least enough of it. The man Daniel had been arguing with was the father of one of Evan's friends. They'd been fighting over something Daniel had said to the boy, something cruel and ugly enough to spiral into violence. That night, Daniel crossed a line he couldn't return from. He was arrested on the spot. The next morning, I went down to the station to give my statement. The officers didn't tell me much, but soon the news filled in the blanks. The trial moved quickly. Overwhelming evidence, witness testimony, no room for doubt. In the end, Daniel Reed was sentenced to death. I still live in the same house. The yellow one next door sits empty now, its blinds always drawn tight, like the house itself is trying to hide what happened inside. Some nights I catch myself staring at that upstairs window, the one where I saw it, and even though Daniel is locked away awaiting the end, I still find myself lowering my voice after dark. Some part of me, the part that felt his shadow pressing into my walls, can't shake the feeling that he might still be listening. I was 8 the day my parents sat me down and said we were moving again. It didn't come as a shock. By then, I'd grown used to packing up boxes every couple of years, my dad's job as a construction site manager dragging us from one forgettable town to the next. But this time, something was different. My parents weren't just resigned to it, they seemed almost relieved. Like they believed this new house was the answer to problems we weren't allowed to talk about. At the time, we were crammed into a 2-bedroom rental right off a roaring highway. Trucks thundered past at all hours, rattling the thin walls, and Mom would mutter that she couldn't stand one more night of headlights flashing across her ceiling. She kept saying, just wait until we get there, you'll see." The new town was called Black Hollow, a tiny place tucked into northern Vermont. It was the kind of town where people waved even if they didn't know you, and downtown meant a diner with sticky booths, a hardware store that smelled of oil and wood shavings, and a post office where everyone lingered just to chat. The house itself was unlike anything we'd ever had. White siding, a sagging front porch that groaned when you stepped on it, and a backyard that seemed to melt into the forest. The first time we pulled into the driveway, early September air carried that sharp, sweet smell of leaves already turning. The woods behind the house blazed with orange and red. My little brother Ethan and my older sister Clara tumbled out of the car before it even stopped, running toward the porch. I climbed out slower, staring at the tall windows set into the sloped roof. Even then I felt something, a hush, like the house had been waiting. Inside, the air carried the faint bite of mothballs and aged wood. Heavy oak furniture and floral curtains, leftovers from the last owners, gave the rooms a strange lived-in feel. My parents didn't care. They were in love. "This is it," Dad said, sweeping his hand along the banister like he'd built it himself. Mom just smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years. Clara and I shared a room on the second floor. It had a wide window overlooking the yard and the forest wall beyond. My bed pressed right up against the glass. At first, I thought it was perfect. At night, I could lie under my blanket and fall asleep with the stars staring back at me. For the first few weeks, life felt better than it had in a long time. The house was quiet. The town was calm. We finally had a yard where Ethan and I could kick a soccer ball without worrying about it rolling into traffic. Then the tapping began. The first time it was just after 9:30 at night. I was under the covers, flashlight in hand, reading a Goosebumps book when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Light but deliberate against the window by my bed. The night outside was still, no wind, no rustle. My heart jumped. I told myself it was a moth or maybe a bat brushing the glass, but it didn't stop. 3 taps, then a pause. Another 3. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Clara. She tugged down her headphones, annoyed. "Hear what?" But before I could answer, the sound stopped. I laughed nervously, pretended it was nothing. Kids forget things quick unless they keep happening. And this did. Every few nights, usually between 9 and 10, the tapping returned. Sometimes Clara would glance up from her homework and stiffen, hearing it too. Once Jasper, our cat who never left my bed, suddenly sprang upright, ears flat, hissing at the window before bolting from the room. I slept with the light on after that. A month later, the sound changed. Not tapping anymore, scraping. Long, slow drags like fingernails gliding down the glass. It made my stomach twist. One night, I forced myself to peek through the blinds, heart pounding so hard I thought it might shake the window. But there was nothing there, just darkness and trees. When I finally told my parents, they dismissed it. "Old houses make noises," Mom said gently, kissing the top of my head. "Tree branches," Dad muttered, barely looking up from the paper. But I knew better. There weren't any trees close enough to touch that window. And then it followed me. If I tried to sleep on the couch downstairs, I'd hear a faint knock at the sliding glass door. When I hid in Ethan's room, the sound came from his window instead. Once, desperate, I curled up in the bathroom with the light on. That night, there was a single sharp knock on the door itself. After a while, I stopped telling anyone. I stopped trying to run. I just learned to live with it. As long as Jasper was curled against me, purring steady and warm, I could almost believe I was safe. When Clara finally got her own room 2 years later, the comfort I'd leaned on was gone. Jasper, our cat, had decided he preferred the downstairs couch, leaving me alone again with the silence, the glass, and whatever had been out there. But then, just after I turned 13, the noises stopped. No taps. No scraping. Nothing. For a year, I felt lighter than I could ever remember. I slept through the night. My grades improved. I even tried out for the local soccer team and made it. For the first time, I thought maybe the house had let me go. Then came him. It was a Saturday afternoon in early fall. Ethan and I were kicking a soccer ball across the backyard, daring each other to see who could keep it in the air longer. I gave it one hard kick, and the ball sailed past him, rolling deep into the trees. We chased after it, laughing, but the deeper we went, the quieter everything became. No wind, no bird calls, just heavy, suffocating silence. When we finally found the ball, it wasn't in the woods anymore. It was resting in the yard of a small, weathered house I could have sworn hadn't been there before. A man was standing beside it, holding the ball in one hand. "You kids lose this?" he called, voice casual but too smooth, too rehearsed. Ethan, always too trusting, ran right up to him. "Yeah, thanks." I hung back, stomach tightening. Something about the way the man smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. "You live up on the hill, don't you?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward our house. Ethan nodded eagerly. "Yeah, I'm 10, and she's 14. We moved here last year." I shot him a sharp glare. Don't tell him that. But Ethan was already bouncing on his toes, grinning like he'd made a new friend. The man, who said his name was Mark, handed back the ball. As we turned to leave, he added, almost as if it were a joke, "I see you two out here a lot. Sometimes I watch from my window." He chuckled. Ethan laughed nervously, unsure. I didn't. My skin crawled. We didn't tell our parents. I knew what they'd say. No more woods, no more soccer out back, and Ethan would take the blame. I couldn't do that to him. So I kept it to myself. A week later, on a calm October night, the tapping returned. At first I froze in my bed. I hadn't heard it in over a year, and for one blissful second I told myself I'd imagined it. But then it came again. Tap, 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 and then the scraping, slow and deliberate, dragging down the glass. My chest tightened. Jasper darted off the bed, tail puffed, leaving me alone. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was tired of being afraid. Maybe some part of me wanted to prove to myself that it was nothing. I grabbed my hoodie, crept downstairs, and slipped out into the backyard. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting my lungs. The moonlight made my breath visible in faint, ghostly clouds. I didn't make it halfway across the yard before a hand clamped over my mouth. My feet left the ground as I was yanked backward, dragged toward the trees. My heart slammed against my ribs. I kicked, twisted, bit his hand until he cursed and dropped me. It was Mark. "You little brat," he hissed, lunging again. I lashed out with my foot, connecting with his shin, and bolted toward the house, screaming. The porch light snapped on. Dad came running, hunting rifle in hand. He spotted Mark and bellowed, "Let her go or I'll drop you where you stand." Mark froze for half a heartbeat, then snatched up a rock the size of his fist and hurled it. It struck Dad in the head. He crumpled instantly. "Dad!" I screamed. Mom appeared in the doorway, voice breaking as she shrieked my name. She pulled me inside, fumbling with the phone, calling 911 as Dad groaned weakly on the porch. The police came within minutes. 2 officers charged toward Mark's house while others stayed with us. What followed was chaos. The thud of boots, shouts in the dark, and then the sharp crack of gunfire. Not one shot, but many. 9 in total. When it was over, they told us Mark had opened fire on them from inside his house. 1 officer killed, 3 wounded, and Mark himself, dead. But it was what they found inside that froze my blood. The walls were covered in photographs of neighborhood children. Dozens of me, Ethan, Clara, even Mom and Dad. Some were taken through our windows. Others were older, years old, from towns we'd lived in before. In a locked room, they found the bodies of 3 children who'd gone missing from nearby towns. It was him. All those years, the tapping at the glass, the scraping, the watching, it had been Mark. We still live in the same house. I don't open my blinds at night anymore. Jasper has returned to sleeping curled against me, and I try to convince myself the worst is over. But sometimes on quiet nights when the house is still, I dream of that tapping. And in the dream, I know it isn't over at all. I was 11 the year we moved into the little beige house on Larchwood Court, a quiet crescent tucked away in a sleepy corner of Ridgeford, Illinois. At that age, it felt like stepping into a dream. The place had this suburban calm, rows of trimmed lawns that looked like they'd been cut with scissors, old oak trees bowing over the sidewalks, and neighbors who actually waved when you rode by on your bike. My parents had been saving for years, scraping every dollar they could to get us out of the cramped 2-bedroom apartment across town. And when they finally landed this 2-story house, with its wide front porch and fenced-in backyard, they couldn't stop smiling. For me, it wasn't just the house. It was the whole feeling of it, the sound of sprinklers ticking in the heat, lawnmowers humming on Saturday mornings, kids riding bikes until the streetlights flicked on. It was safe, or at least it seemed safe, except for one place, 2 doors down sat the house that never fit. Dark green paint peeled in patches, the curtains drawn tight even at noon. It wasn't abandoned, at least not at first. The Millers, an older couple, lived there. They were quiet, kept to themselves, never unfriendly but never really neighborly either. Then, a few months after we'd settled in, they just vanished. No for sale sign, no moving truck, not even a goodbye. One day the house was theirs, the next it was hollow. For almost half a year it stayed that way. Then, one gray October afternoon, a moving van finally pulled into the driveway. That was the day we met him. The man who moved in came alone. No wife, no kids, not even much furniture. Just a couple of boxes, a scuffed black duffel bag, and a sagging recliner that he muscled inside by himself. He introduced himself to my parents as Mr. Holbrook, but when he spotted the neighborhood kids lingering on the curb, he gave us a crooked grin and said, "Just call me Dan." He looked mid-30s, tall but hollow in the face, his dark hair shaggy like he hadn't bothered with a haircut in months. He smiled, but it wasn't the kind that reached his eyes. At first, there was nothing remarkable about him. He kept to himself mostly. We'd see him step onto his porch to smoke or shuffle to the mailbox, and that was it. But I started to notice things. Late at night, when the rest of the house was asleep, I'd still be awake upstairs. Through my window, I sometimes caught a faint glow moving in the trees behind our houses. A flashlight. Once or twice, I saw him standing there just at the edge of the woods, motionless, like he was listening to something, or watching. Around that time, I was spending more evenings outside with the neighborhood kids. My twin brother, Evan, and our younger brother, Caleb, were already tight with Noah from next door. Sometimes Noah's friend Mason joined us, and the 5 of us made our own fun. Our favorite game was one we invented, Murder Run. One kid was the murderer, hiding somewhere inside our set boundaries, while the rest of us tried to make it back to base, our front porch, before getting tagged. Whoever was caught had to be the murderer in the next round. We had even fashioned a wooden sword, handed to the chosen murderer each time as if to make it official. It was stupid, harmless fun, the kind of game that got your heart racing, but in the way you wanted, because deep down you knew you were safe. Or so we thought. One night near the end of October, the air had that sharp bite that hinted winter wasn't far off. You could see your breath floating under the streetlights, the whole neighborhood bathed in their dim orange glow. That night it was just the 5 of us, me, Evan, Caleb, Noah, and Mason. We'd been playing for close to an hour, running ourselves ragged, until we agreed on one last round. Noah hadn't had a turn as the murderer yet, so we handed him the wooden sword. He twirled it once, grinning, and said, "All right, you've got 30 seconds, better run." He grinned, spinning the wooden sword like he was some swashbuckling pirate, and then darted off into the shadows. The rest of us sat shoulder to shoulder on the porch steps, covering our eyes with our hands as we counted aloud to 60. Our voices overlapped, half serious, half giggling, and when we hit the last number, the group split. Evan and Mason veered left, disappearing between 2 parked cars while Caleb and I crept right, keeping low, whispering guesses about where Noah might hide. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of crickets and the faint buzz of the street lamps overhead. We scanned the shadows, peeking behind trash bins and mailboxes. My pulse sped when I caught movement near the trunk of an old maple up ahead, just the slightest shape shifting in the dark. I opened my mouth, ready to whisper that I'd found Noah, when sudden shrieks and laughter erupted from the other side of the street where Evan and Mason were. Relieved, I almost smiled, until something shifted behind me. Noah stepped out of the darkness, his brow furrowed. "Why are they running?" he asked. My throat tightened. That meant, who was over there with them? His eyes flicked past me then, and I watched the blood drain from his face. I turned, slowly at first, then all at once, and my stomach dropped. Someone else was chasing Evan and Mason. For a fleeting second, I thought maybe it was another neighborhood kid joining in, but then the light caught on something unmistakable, the flash of metal in his hand. a knife. The man wore black from head to toe except for a pair of glaringly white sneakers that stood out in the glow of the streetlight. "Noah, run!" I screamed, the words ripping from my throat. Everything shattered into chaos. Caleb bolted straight for the house, Noah tearing after him, their shoes slapping hard against the pavement. I froze, just a fraction of a second, long enough for the man to close in so I could see him clearly. His clothes were wrong, too small. The seams pulled tight across his chest and arms as if they'd been meant for someone younger. The sneakers, spotless white, were obviously too small for his feet too. His steps came in jerky, unnatural bursts. And in that moment I understood he was dressed like us. He was trying to be one of us. Adrenaline snapped me out of it. I ran harder than I'd ever run before, lungs burning, legs pumping, vision tunneling until there was nothing but the porch light ahead of me. Behind me, Evan and Mason's voices had changed, their laughter replaced by sharp, terrified screams. They made it to the porch first, Caleb stumbling up right after them, then Noah fumbling desperately at the front door, hands shaking. I was the last, heart slamming against my ribs as I pushed every ounce of strength into the sprint. The man slowed once he reached the sidewalk, like he knew the chase was over. He stopped beneath the orange halo of the streetlight, tilting his head at a strange angle, the knife dangling loosely at his side. The light revealed just enough, a shadow of stubble around his mouth, hollowed cheeks, unreadable eyes. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. Then, slowly, he turned. He walked away as if nothing had happened, heading down the block. When he reached the patch of pavement where I'd spit blood from biting my cheek, he paused, glanced back, and this time, he smiled. I shoved everyone inside and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. My parents came running, demanding answers, but by the time my dad rushed out into the street, the man was gone. He searched up and down the block into the tree line behind the houses, but there was nothing, just empty silence. We didn't call the police. To this day, I can't explain why. Maybe because we were just kids, our story too wild, too fragmented to sound real. Maybe because my dad wanted to believe it had been some drunk cutting through the neighborhood. We never saw him again. But years later, walking home late one night, I remembered that October, and something clicked. The man hadn't just shown up out of nowhere. He knew the rules of our game. We never explained them that night, every kid already knew. Which meant he'd been there before, lurking in the dark, listening, waiting for his turn. And sometimes when I pass that old maple tree where I first thought I saw Noah hiding, I can't shake the feeling he's still out there, patient, waiting for another round. I bought the house in late February of last year, after nearly 12 months of scraping together savings and combing through endless listings. It wasn't what I'd call a dream home. Honestly, I don't even know if I believe in that sort of thing. But it checked the boxes we needed. A quiet cul-de-sac, only 5 houses tucked neatly in a curve, each with a yard big enough to breathe and fences spaced far enough apart that you didn't feel like you were practically living in your neighbor's kitchen. For me and Rachel, my wife, it was meant to be a clean break from the claustrophobic apartment life. We'd spent 5 long years in that tiny unit, paper-thin walls where you heard every fight and every late-night TV show, a ceiling that leaked when the upstairs tenant forgot his bath was running, and this stale, constant stink of burnt food that no amount of candles could kill. We wanted something simpler, quieter, a place where our space belonged to us. Maybe even a neighborhood where the people nodded when they saw you instead of avoiding eye contact in the hallway. When we first moved in, the Browns were next door. Retired couple, kind of old-fashioned polite. They'd wave if we were out front, sometimes stop to chat about the weather or complain about the mail service. We weren't friends, but their presence was steady, familiar. They'd lived in that house for decades, and there was a certain comfort in that kind of stability. Then in early May, I noticed their place went dark. No porch light, no flicker of the TV through the curtains at night. Just nothing. A week later, a for sale sign staked itself in their lawn. By the end of June, they were gone. For a while, the house just sat empty. The driveway cracked and weeds started sprouting through, messy little flags of abandonment. The mailbox got so full the postal worker finally gave up and strapped it shut with a rubber band. Every window looked hollow, blank, like dead eyes. Then, one Friday evening, Rachel spotted a white cargo van parked in their driveway. No moving truck, no carloads of family lugging in boxes, just that van. The first weekend, it never moved. Curtains stayed closed. No lights, no shadows pacing behind the glass. Saturday morning, the van was still there, same position. Rachel nudged me as we drank coffee at the table. "Think someone's moving in?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "We'll find out soon enough." By Sunday afternoon, we figured it was time to introduce ourselves. Be good neighbors. We walked over and knocked. Nothing. Knocked again, harder this time. The van sat silent. The house was quiet in that unsettling way that made you think it was listening. Rachel leaned closer to me and whispered, "What if they're sleeping?" "In the middle of the day?" I muttered. Still, we waited another moment before heading back across the lawn. Something about it made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. A few nights later, around 11 p.m., Rachel and I were upstairs in bed reading. Our bedroom window faces their backyard, and at the far end they've got a detached garage. It's got one of those floodlights that pops on when anything moves. I heard the rattle of a garage door sliding open. Curious, I pulled the blinds just enough to peek. The light snapped on, spilling white across the driveway. That's when I saw him for the first time. A man, maybe late 40s, plain white t-shirt and jeans, pulling large boxes from the back of the van and stacking them carefully inside the garage. "Finally," I whispered. Rachel leaned over to see, but I let the blinds fall shut. "Don't," I told her. "Let's not be the nosy neighbors." But it stuck with me. Why move in only at night? Why never during the day? A few nights later, the van returned. Same routine. The garage door creaked open, the floodlight blinked on. But this time, the noises were different. A metallic scrape, slow and sharp, like someone dragging something heavy over concrete. Every few minutes there was a loud, hollow thud. I tried to focus on my book, but the sound carried into our walls, a steady reminder. Finally, I gave in and looked. The moment I pushed the blinds apart, I froze. He was standing there, half in shadow, staring directly at my window. Our eyes locked, and for a moment the world shrank to that thin slice of glass between us. His face didn't twitch, didn't shift. No surprise at being caught, no neighborly smile. Just a flat, heavy stare. It wasn't blank so much as deliberate, like he wanted me to see him. I stepped back from the blinds, heart climbing into my throat. Seconds later, the garage door rattled shut. "I'm going to introduce myself," I whispered. Rachel sat up in bed, frowning. "At midnight? Are you serious?" I don't want it to get weird. I'll say hi, that's it." She shook her head, but I was already pulling on sneakers, heading downstairs in nothing but a t-shirt and shorts. By the time I crossed the lawn, the man was climbing into his van. The engine roared to life, headlights slicing across the cul-de-sac. He reversed fast, gravel crunching beneath the tires, and within seconds he was gone. But the unease didn't leave with him. It clung to me, heavy and insistent. My curiosity pushed me further than it should have. I slipped through the shadows into his backyard. The night air was still, except for that sound. A steady thump. Pause. Another thump. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't tools. It was too rhythmic, too organic, like something struggling. "Evan, what the hell are you doing?" Rachel's voice cut across the dark, sharp with panic. She was leaning out our bedroom window, hair messy, eyes wide. I lifted a finger to my lips, silently begging her to lower her voice. She scowled and vanished from sight. I crept up to the garage, hand trembling as I reached for the door handle. Cold metal. Locked. I stood there, listening to the muted pounding within. Then I forced myself to turn back. Enough. Sometime around 3 a.m., Rachel shook me awake. "Evan," she whispered urgently, "the backyard gate just opened." I groaned, half asleep. "You're dreaming." "I'm not. I heard it." Adrenaline yanked me upright. I hurried to the window. Our yard was black, the kind of black that swallows everything. But the van was back in his driveway. I went downstairs, unlocked the back door, and stepped into the night. The motion light snapped on, flooding the yard. Footsteps pounded toward the fence, fast, retreating. The gate banged shut with a final slam. I sprinted through the house out to the street. Empty. No van moving, no figure in sight. But the air was charged, heavy, like someone had just been standing there, watching me. The next morning, I walked over to Jean's place 2 doors down. Jean was retired, late 50s, the kind of neighbor who knew every story on the block. When I asked if he'd met the new guy, he shook his head. "But I'll tell you something," he said, lowering his voice. "I've been hearing things too. From the garage, late at night. Woke me up more than once. Sounds like metal scraping, dragging." I told him about the footsteps, the gate. We made a pact. Next time either of us heard something, we'd text and go over together. That Saturday morning, I pulled the blinds in our living room and froze. The van sat in the driveway. Daylight. First time I'd seen it there when the sun was up. And then I noticed him, standing perfectly still at his window, eyes locked on me. I expected him to look away when I noticed. He didn't. I raised my hand in a weak, awkward wave. Nothing. Not even a blink. "Rachel," I called. But by the time she came over, he was gone. "That's it," I muttered. "We're meeting him today." We marched over and knocked. Silence. Then, thud. A loud, heavy thump from inside. Rachel's grip tightened painfully around my arm. "Let's go," she whispered. That evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Jean. Crying. From his garage. I went straight over. Jean's wife answered the door, pale and unsettled. Her voice was barely a whisper. It wasn't just crying. It sounded muffled, like someone trying not to be heard. Jean and I knocked together, fists against the front door. Silence. 2 days later, the van was gone. It hasn't come back. Nearly 2 weeks now. And yet at night, Rachel and I jolt awake convinced we've heard something outside. Sometimes faint footsteps across the yard. Sometimes the latch of the backyard gate rattling. The worst part, we never even learned his name. But I can still see his face framed by that window. Unblinking, patient, like he was waiting for me to pull the blinds open. And I can still hear it. That sound from his garage. The sound of something alive, trapped in the dark. I still remember the first time I saw him. It was mid-August, the kind of summer night that clings to your skin, heavy and damp, as if even the air was too tired to move. My mom had just dragged the last cardboard box out of the back of our dented old Ford. Her hair stuck to her forehead in damp strands, and I sat cross-legged on the uneven lawn, tracing circles in the dirt and nudging at a row of ants with a stick. We'd just moved into a small one-story house on the edge of Briarwood, a neighborhood that looked like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to be kept up or just let itself rot. Most of the grass on our street was knee-high, fences slumped like they were exhausted, and every few driveways you'd see a sun-bleached car with 4 flat tires surrendered to the years. I was 7 then. Noah was 9, already acting like he was too old to care about anything, and little Ellie, just 5, ran squealing through the backyard, her curls bouncing as she shouted about finding treasure under the porch. Mom's eyes kept scanning the place in that quiet, restless way parents do, as if she could rearrange danger just by looking hard enough at it. We'd moved because of Dad's transfer, though the word transfer sounded more hopeful than it was. His new job meant travel, long stretches where he'd be gone for weeks, sometimes more. Mom hated that. She used to mutter, half to herself. Feels like we're sleeping in a tent without a zipper. Anybody, anything could just walk right in. That's when I noticed him. He was standing on the porch of the house next door, half hidden behind a curtain of tangled vines that had swallowed the railing long ago. Tall, wiry, the kind of pale that doesn't come from winter, but from years of avoiding the sun. His hair hung dark and uncombed, jaw rough with a few days of scruff. But none of that is what stuck in my memory. It was the way he looked at my mom, not smiling, not waving, just watching. His eyes followed her as she lugged another box up our steps, slow and deliberate, like he was committing her every movement to memory. Then his gaze slid to me, then Noah, then Ellie, before circling back to Mom. No nod. No, welcome to the neighborhood. Just that flat stare. Don't stare, Mom muttered as she passed me, a box wedged against her hip. Some people around here, you just don't. I didn't know what she meant back then. That first week passed mostly in a blur of unpacking, trying to make the place feel like home. The backyard had fences on two sides, but the other was wide open to the neighbor's property. Mom said she wanted it closed off someday, but money was tight, so for now it stayed bare. A gap that felt more like an invitation. Every so often I'd see him. Once he sat in a lawn chair at dusk, cigarette glowing in the dim light, smoke curling around his head as he stared into our yard. Another time I caught him parting his blinds, his face pale in the sliver of window, watching as Mom carried groceries inside. He never flinched when you caught him. He never looked away. He just kept watching, like being seen didn't matter to him at all. Dad was only home 3 nights that whole first month, 3 nights out of 30. And every time he was there, the man seemed to vanish, like he knew. Mom noticed it too, her glances toward the neighbor's house sharp, her jaw tightening. It was late September when it finally happened. Dad was in Chicago. The nights had cooled, and after a long day of school and errands, we'd gone to bed early. That was when things changed. I woke up thirsty one night and padded to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I tipped the glass back, I froze. There it was, this faint metallic sound, like something small, tapping against glass. I held my breath, straining to catch it again, but the house stayed silent. After a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing, the pipes maybe, and crept back to bed. It must have been just past midnight when the first knock came. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door, the kind that sink into your chest. Mom's bedroom door creaked open, and I heard her bare feet whisper across the hallway floor. She went to the door and called softly, "Who is it?" Her voice was even, but I recognized the edge underneath. It was the tone she used when she was trying not to scare us, though she was scared herself. Silence. She checked the peephole, then leaned sideways to glance out the narrow window by the door. Nothing. Probably kids, she must have told herself. She went back to bed. Half an hour later, it came again. This time the knocking was sharper, quicker, like whoever it was had grown impatient. Mom rose again, but this time she didn't just peek through the blinds. She crouched low, tilting her head to see through the side window, careful, as though whoever stood out there might be watching back. Later she told me she'd braced herself to see a figure slinking away. But there was no one. In another neighborhood, maybe that would have been the end of it. But not in Briarwood. People didn't knock for no reason. And if they did, the reason was never good. This time she didn't go back to sleep. She walked into her closet, reached up to the high shelf, and pulled down the old shotgun Dad kept, just in case. I remember the sound, the soft metallic click as she slid in shells. She didn't wake us. Not yet. Years later, she told me she hadn't wanted us panicking unless she was sure. She sat in the living room, lights off, the shotgun across her lap, eyes locked on the front door. The third set of knocks came around 1:20 a.m. Slow, steady, unnervingly patient. Mom rose to her feet, gripping the gun, and edged toward the blinds. She didn't yank them open, just tilted them a fraction. Nothing. Still nothing. Her voice broke the silence, sharp and loud enough to carry through the door. "I'm calling the police. Whoever you are, you better get off my porch." She paused, listening. No response. Then firmer, each word ironclad. "If you try to come in, I will shoot you." She told me later the air felt different after that, like whoever it was had been weighing their options, and finally decided she wasn't worth the risk. The knocking stopped, but she never lowered the gun. The police showed up around 2. We watched from behind the curtains as 2 officers circled the yard, flashlights skimming over the grass. Then came a gentler knock at our door. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we found something near your porch." He held it up, a piece of barbed wire, about 4 feet long, the ends twisted into crude handles. "That yours?" Mom's face drained of color. "No?" The officer shook his head. "Then I think you were right to stay inside. Whoever was knocking likely meant to use this when you answered the door." I didn't understand then, but later I realized what he meant. They'd planned to strangle her. Morning brought worse news. Fresh footprints trailed from the porch around to the back, ending beneath my bedroom window. The wood of the sill bore fresh scratches, as if someone had tried to pry it open. Tried, but failed. Mom's suspicions went straight to the neighbor. She'd seen him more than once, standing at his curtain, staring with that slow, unblinking gaze. And he was the only one who knew for sure when Dad was out of town. For a few days after, we didn't see him. Then one afternoon, there he was again, leaning against his porch railing, eyes fixed on Mom as she stepped out of the car. We left before the month was over. I've never been back to Briarwood,